You're listening to Mystic Lounge with Alan B. Smith. Rebroadcast on the Onyx Network. Thursdays at 11 p.m. Pacific. Fridays at 2 a.m. Eastern.
However you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls, to Mystic Lounge. This is Alan B. Smith, your most grateful host. We are back live. I know it's been intermittent between Mystic Lounge live streams, but here we are. So thank you all for joining us tonight. I have a really, really great guest, Mindy Tautfest. She is the author of the book, Dying to Meet Them, which we will talk about in depth tonight. It was a great read. She's also the dean of MUFON University, and she has some really exciting news, actually, regarding the future of MUFON, which I'm excited to share for all of you who are UFO enthusiasts and investigators. I'm sure you'll appreciate that. As usual, if you could please subscribe, comment down below, like, all of that really helps to support the channel, and click the notification bell so you don't miss live streams like this and the occasional pop-up live stream that we have as well. And of course, Coffee and UFOs next week on Coffee and UFOs, same time, same place. Richard Dolan will be joining me for a conversation about the history of ufology, the future, disclosure, and a new term that we're hearing lately, exposure. So we'll dig down into that. I've been thinking about this for a little while. Back in the old days when Mystic Lounge used to be called Paranormal Now, we used to have call-in lines where you, the listener, could call in live and ask guests a question and comment on whatever the topic is. Most reactions have been positive when I asked, hey, would you guys want to have that back again? I've got a couple of people who said, we just like the more podcast form. But I am really thinking about bringing that back. So everyone in the comment tonight, if you can just let me know what you think. Do you want to see those open lines again? Do you want to be able to call in and talk to the guests? I'd really appreciate that. I miss it. I come from a background of improvisation and being on stage, and I enjoy the kind of thrill of the moment and just never knowing where a conversation's going. And when you're live, there's no going back. There's no editing. It just is what it is. So I've always loved that format. And I'm really tempted to bring that back. So we'll see. I really want to hear what you have to say regarding that. Okay, so let's bring on our fantabulous guest. It's Mindy Tautfest, Dean of MUFON University. Mindy is a near-death experiencer whose heartbreaking experience led to an upheaval of her religious and spiritual beliefs, while confirming for her that consciousness indeed continues after death. Mindy Tautfest is a published author, speaker, television personality, and curator of the Hayden C. Hewes International UFO Bureau. Mindy has worked as an ICU nurse with ACLS certification on assignments across the nation and has volunteered her time to disaster relief efforts, including the Colorado Black Forest fires, Hurricane Katrina, and the devastating May 3rd, 1999 Moore tornado. In 2016, Tautfest suffered a dissected brain aneurysm, resulting in a near-death experience, and that's what we'll be talking about tonight. If you want to find out more, here is Mindy Tautfest. Mindy, welcome to Mystic Lounge. How are you?
Thank you, Alan. I'm great. It's good to see you.
You too. Yeah, we had a nice chat. I guess, was it about a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, I know. We ended up talking for like 2 hours.
We did. We were going to do a show, but I hadn't read your book yet. And I really much prefer to read the material if I can. So I did read Dying to Meet Them. And I want to say it's a great book, but the truth is there's a lot of hardship and tragedy in the book. So if you can just take us on that journey, because really it's an expedited journey, I would say, of your harrowing experience to where you are now.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you got a chance to read it. And I've been hearing from people that have read through it so far. It was released, about 3 weeks ago. And everyone I'm hearing from is, I can't put it down. I couldn't have put it down. I got right through it. So that's wonderful to hear that people are actually identifying with some of the things that are in there. So to back up, what happened to me was in 2016, I was living out on a 300-acre wheat farm with my husband, and we had moved back out there to kind of help my father-in-law. He's up in his 70s and was having trouble, taking care of everything out there on the farm. So he was happy to have my husband back. And so I was there by myself that day. It was actually the day of the presidential election between Hillary and Trump. Excuse me. My voice is still tired from the symposium this weekend. So I was home by myself that day. My husband and kids had gone to school. My husband was a Southern Baptist minister at the time, but he was also pulling double duty, working as a teacher and coach at the local school. And so he drove the school bus and took my kids to school with him and brought them back. And so it was probably early afternoon, around 4-ish, 4:30, whenever I came out to the couch and I was looking to see if there were any early exit polls on my phone. And that's when I heard this loud explosion inside my head. And my first instinct was to think that I had been shot, because there had been coyote hunters all around just in the weeks prior. And I thought, okay, they've shot through the wall and shot me. But I was trying, as an ICU nurse, so I'm trying to assess the situation, and I don't feel any blood. And that's when I realized this has got to be a brain aneurysm. And I knew that I was at risk for them because of a underlying condition I had, but they didn't think that I had the type that caused aneurysms. And so whenever I started realizing, okay, this is really bad, that's whenever I felt what I describe as an electrical avalanche that started at the top of my head. And it just felt like a peeling away, like a rolling away from me, from my head to my toes. And it was excruciating. And that's the moment I realized I'm not going to survive this. There's no way. And I was sitting there sitting on my couch, looking at my front door with the door wide open, waiting for the kids to come in and give mommy hugs and kisses and tell me about their day. And my heart just sank. And I started praying, God, do not let my kids find my body. At the time, they were 5 and 7 years old. And I didn't want to be the worst thing that ever happened to them. And so I was in deep, remorseful prayer, just that this was happening and that my children may be the ones to find me. And as I was praying deeply, I started kind of looking around. I kind of stopped and I just looked, and I realized I was in darkness. And I didn't even realize at that point that I was dead. My first instinct was like, I'm not hurting. Okay. I was trying to assess if it was dark or if there was nothing around me. So I put my hand out in front of me. And that's what you see on the cover of the book, is the hand in the darkness sticking out there, because that was my first instinct. Let me look at my hand. And when I couldn't see it, I thought, okay, well, let me try to clap my hands. Do I have hands? And so I started trying to clap. And when I did that, that's when I realized I have no form. I am dead. And my heart just sunk. I started waiting at that point, okay, well, what comes next? There should be this tunnel of light showing up, and I'm waiting for my loved ones to greet me. I'm waiting for Jesus to show up. And the more time I waited, the more I started getting more fearful, because nothing was happening. And so I started going, okay, I turned back to my Christian teaching, and I'm like, what's next? I guess I'm waiting on judgment. I'm either going to heaven or hell. And
you were more fundamental, right? Fundamentalist.
Absolutely. Yeah. My husband was a Southern Baptist minister, and we had traveled all over the state of Oklahoma preaching the gospel. And I was very fundamental in my belief. So I was waiting for the Christian narrative to unfold. and I'm waiting, you know, and I'm fearful because I don't know if I'm going to heaven or hell, because I'm not getting the tunnel of light. I'm not, you know, I'm not getting any greeting here.
Mhm.
And so I start praying again, and I'm in deep prayer, asking Jesus to be my righteousness and to stand in my place. I can't get into heaven without you. And I'm praying for my husband and kids. I'm wondering if they found my body yet. And, you know, I'm devastated because I've just lost them. And I'm trying to deal with that. And I'm trying to deal with my eternity. I'm trying to figure out, you know, what's unfolding here. And as more time passed, it felt like an eternity over there. I felt like I was there so long. And I started kind of filling out the area, and I realized that, okay, I felt like I was almost in an invisible box that was separating me from everything. And I could feel God surrounding me. I mean, he was this force that was everywhere around me, and he contained everything, all of creation from all time, you know, as far back, you know, from creation until now. He was
You
everything.
say he, but in your book, you also talk about there being a separate male entity presence. Are those
Yes.
one of the same thing, or separate?
No, these two were separate. What I call God, or the source,
Mhm.
was this force that just surrounded and encompassed everything. And me being separate from that is part of what just crushed me spiritually, because I was not allowed to be part of everything in existence. And there was no remedy for my soul there, because I I was just my feelings. I was just my thoughts.
Yeah.
And there was nothing. I couldn't turn on the TV. I couldn't even twiddle my thumbs. I couldn't do anything to take my mind off of what was happening there. And so I started reflecting on myself, you know, what have I done? Why am I cast out into this darkness by
Mhm.
myself? I didn't
You're
understand.
expecting the white light, and family and friends are greeting you from their past, and
Yeah.
that wasn't there. Did it? I guess it must have just felt utterly lonely.
It was incredibly and fearful. I mean, I was in a place that I had no knowledge of. You know, I expected to either be in heaven or hell, and I was caught somewhere in between. And I describe it more later in the book about my feelings on it.
Mhm.
But while I was there, and I didn't have a life review. I kind of more just assessed myself and said, what's wrong with me? Why am I not good enough for you, God? And I've tried doing everything for you. You know, I've preached your gospel. I've loved you. I've done everything I can. And it came to me that I needed to learn to love myself. And as soon as that happened, that's when that male presence showed up behind me. And I couldn't see him. I sensed him there. And and I describe in the book, it was almost like a hesitant kindness that he showed to me. Like he was breaking a rule to even contact me there. But I think my suffering was at such a point that he intervened, and he told me, you're not going to be here forever. And once he did, I mean, instantly I was relieved, because I knew someone was there, and I knew I wasn't going to be there forever. And as soon as he did that, that's when we started sailing off to the left, and I noticed a purple glow in the distance. And as we continued getting closer and closer to it, it had these pink intersecting lines in it, and where they met up, they glowed bright yellow.
Mhm.
And just the closer I got, the more love just radiated off of it. And I thought, wow. And he said, that's the fabric of humanity.
So that fabric of humanity you're seeing in the void. So
Right.
is the void a negative, a bad place? Is it an
I
evil
don't believe
place,
so.
or okay?
I don't believe so. And that's one of the things that I had to research. And this was years after. I spent 2 years, you know, and you read through all the suffering and
Mhm.
what I really went through just to survive physically. After that, after I spoke to my husband about it, we started looking at some of the other religions and what they thought about places of darkness and whatnot. I really don't believe I was in purgatory. I wasn't under any kind of judgment.
Mhm.
The void held no ill will towards me. it was almost like a place for me to purge. And it was a place just of neutrality. I almost believe mainly with what the Tibetan Book of the Dead says, which is that where I was at the highest heaven. I was bare in front of the God that created everything. And so it completely changed my faith. I'm not a Christian now, but I don't have to have faith. I know that God exists. I have no doubt.
Right. Well, so according to many traditions, which you talk about in the book, that in the beginning there was essentially a void, a nothingness, or at best, waters, and no light. Right. There's and the face of God flying over the water, and bringing
Right.
life and all that. And then other traditions also have similar creation stories. So if the void, and I'm thinking of this because Ufi in chat had commented here, if the void is a representation of what was, or the absolute substrate, like the deepest systems of the software, like
Uh-huh.
that sounds like what it sounds like the void is, because you're seeing this intersection of these lines, these energy lines that are occurring there.
Right.
That, to my mind, that sounds just truly neutral and not inherently good or evil
Right.
in any way. Does that mean that heaven, when as people imagine heaven to be, or what they expect it to be, is a creation itself that came from the void?
I believe so. That, and I get into that in the later chapters, and that was really what kind of was impressed on my spirit, was that I was operating outside of any kind of construct, whether it be here on this earth, whether it be heaven, whether it be
Mm-hmm.
hell. I was, and I say in there, I was literally with the great and powerful Oz. I saw behind the curtain
Right.
where
Yeah.
all of this came from. And you bring up the other traditions where there was like none or chaos, and all of these have everything springing out of nothing, out of this dark void. And I believe that that's exactly where I was. And the frightening aspect of it is, I mean, you think about people in the Bible that fell
Mm-hmm.
down and worshiped angels because they were terrified, and the angels are like, don't worship me, get up. I mean, to be laid completely bare in front of the creator of everything is a
Mm-hmm.
terrifying experience in itself. But like I said, the void did not hold any ill will towards me. I was terrified because I didn't know where I was, and I didn't know how to process what was happening to me.
What was the drawback? How did you find yourself being pulled back to consciousness?
Well, after I was shown the fabric of humanity, I
Mhm.
really wanted to go to it, and he had indicated, no, it's not for you. Um, and I believe it wasn't for me
Well, there's a
at that
parallel.
point.
That's a parallel right there, because even sometimes people who have near-death experiences where they see, a luminous white light, all-encompassing white light, or a tunnel, they're drawn to it, right? So even though yours is the void and you're seeing kind of an emptiness, a lack of light, but you do see something, and you're
Yeah,
drawn to that something. And that's very similar.
I almost wonder if he showed that to me so that I would always have that hope, because I think if I
Mm.
had left there with just the darkness, I don't know. I thank him for what the kindness that he showed to me to step forward and to comfort me and to show me what he did. But after he showed that to me, immediately, bam, I was back in my body, and I restarted almost like a computer booting up. I mean, it was a woof, and I was back.
Yeah.
And when I came to, I was slumped over on the couch. I had had a stroke. My right arm wasn't working. My speech was slurred, and I had had the aneurysm. And the actual term for what I had is a vertebral artery dissection. So it wasn't like a vein, ballooned out in my brain. This
Mhm.
was an artery leading up into my brain that ripped in two places, that two large chunks blew out of it. And so it was a very serious situation. Most people do not survive the initial dissection like I did.
And you survived a long time without getting properly diagnosed as well.
Yeah, and I go into that in the book where it was 2 years. Right after I came to, I was able to find my phone and I called my father-in-law, and he came over and sat with me for a few minutes until my husband got home. And where we lived, we were 30 miles away from the closest hospital. And this was a little community hospital that was the closest to us.
Yeah.
And so they got me loaded up in the car and drove me up there. And they did one scan and said, well, maybe your neck shifted. And they sent me home. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. Something really bad happened. And I returned to the ER the next day. I went up there several more times, and they would call my neurologist, and the neurologist would say, you know, you have this type of migraine that looks like a stroke, and quit coming up to the ER. And so we finally had enough of it. We sold our house and then moved back to Oklahoma City, where within a week I was in with a good doctor who did the scans and said, I can't believe you are alive.
Well, with your background as a nurse, what was it that people were ignoring? Why wouldn't they listen to you when you were telling them, hey, something's wrong here? I don't know if it's part of your case at all. I don't want to overlay that on you, but I do know that statistically women tend to be less believed than men when they're in hospitals when they express pain. So I'll let you answer that, but I think we should add something to your backstory, which people may not really understand. You growing up, because you had what's the genetic condition where you're?
It's called Ehlers-Danlos. Yeah, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Okay, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So that creates constant pain that you've had to deal with your entire life. So your threshold of pain is probably higher in tolerance, not literally higher, but higher in tolerance and ability to function than the normal person. So when you say I'm feeling pain, they're looking at you going, she doesn't look like she's in pain. Right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. And I even talk about that in the book is, if I had any fault at all, I wasn't sitting there acting like an idiot. I wasn't freaking out and screaming or anything. I was very calmly saying, something happened. I'm in a lot of pain. And I had what's known as occipital neuralgia, and it's actually known as the suicide disease because it basically fried every nerve in my skull, and it felt like lava was flowing through my skull for 2 years. It was horrific pain. And I would sit there and just calmly tell them, I'm in horrific pain.
Calmly. So maybe you should have screamed. Right?
Yeah, well, and part of Ehlers-Danlos having that underlying condition, it causes chronic dislocation. So I'll wake up and my arm's dislocated and I just go about my day and I'm still vacuuming. And, it's part of my life. And so I do have a high pain tolerance because of it. Yeah. And I think that played into why they did not listen to me. But I sat and cried for an hour or so in this doctor's office here in Oklahoma City. And she told me, this is an extremely rare condition that you're talking about, to have a vertebral artery dissection. And I said, I know it happened. And thankfully she listened. And like I said, she sent me in for the testing, and within a week, I mean, that I was in there for the test, and the radiologist, the picture in the back of the book is actually from the radiologist's personal cell phone. He took a picture of it because he couldn't believe that I was sitting there talking to him.
So you had to start working now on your health, right? A couple of years go by. It's a struggle for your family. Excuse me. You went to go live with some friends too, to alleviate some of that stress from your family, right?
I did. Well, and that was before we moved to Oklahoma City. That was right after the dissection had happened. And I was so terrified to be home. I was passing out every day. I was having multiple strokes that I was told to sit in the bathtub and just, just relax. They're not paying. There's nothing wrong.
Well, they said they were migraines, right?
They
That's what they
told
were
me it was
telling
a
you.
migraine, and they told me I had anxiety and to take a nice warm bath. And I was having multiple strokes because it was clotting off. And that's what was saving my life, was that clotting off, so I wouldn't bleed out. But, you know, that's why I ended up moving in with some friends, and they were from church. I had only met this family maybe twice, and we hadn't lived there on the farm very long, so I didn't know them all that well. And I
Yeah.
called them and said, you know, I'm terrified. And my friend Lori, she just said, why don't you just stay with us? I'm home during the day.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, bless her, bless her. I mean, she invited me in. I ended up staying with them for over a month. And I mean, she sat by my bedside. I was having nightmares. I don't even remember. She said I was talking about the void at that time. I didn't think I had talked about it for 2 years, but I guess in whatever state I was in, I was telling her things because
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't able to fall asleep. I was so terrified at that point because I say in the book, I didn't feel like there was any place for me between heaven and earth. You know, I was scared to go back to the void. I was scared to keep living here. I was in such terrible pain. There was no rest. Yeah.
We'll talk about UFOs in just a minute, but I do want to ask you. So, how did this affect your spiritual belief system? You know, everything you believed in was built around, you know, your Christian belief. Uh,
Right.
what happened to that Christian belief? Did it change? Do you believe in something else completely?
Well, and I'm glad you asked me that. I'll tell you, at the symposium, I actually got kind of verbally accosted by a preacher there who was quoting scripture at me and, you know, casting things at me. And, um, you know, I feel sorry for people like that because I used to be people like that.
Mm.
Um, as far as my beliefs now, I have such a greater love for everybody. I have such a greater respect for everybody. I don't have to have a belief in God because I met him. He
Mm.
exists. I have no doubt.
But you say
I don't,
God, he, but then you also refer to a source. Is it a
right.
masculine energy, or are you just using those words and pronouns just from the Bible?
Yeah, I believe more just from the Bible.
Okay.
It was more just a force, immense, that permeated everything.
Mm-hmm.
I guess to personify it, I would put it as a he, but I haven't lost my Christian faith.
Mm-hmm.
I still have questions about Jesus, why he didn't show up, but I think what was done to me there and what I went through there was a divine appointment. I believe it was everything that I needed for my spirit personally to experience, to get on track to
Mm-hmm.
where I needed to be. I don't see it as a judgment. I don't feel like I was harshly judged or anything like that. In fact, I was treated quite nicely there, you know. Um, but
Yeah, at least you had a sort of concierge on
yeah,
the other
yeah.
side, right? Yeah.
I did. And you know, people think of like darker experiences as, you know, being negative, and that's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the truth. It was frightening for me, yes,
Mm-hmm.
but I see the wisdom in it too, because it was everything that I needed. And I'm thankful for it today because I know how far it has brought my spirit. Sorry, my voice is cutting out from the symposium still. But I know how far it's brought my spirit
Mm-hmm.
to where I am today. And I've made such wonderful friends now on this other side of things that I probably never would have talked to before because I had such staunch beliefs against, you know, mingling
Mm.
with anybody different or, you know, anything like that. So
Well,
it's
how did John and your kids adjust to that? Because oftentimes in these situations, once one person goes through an extreme life-altering event, they change, and the rest of the people around them can't adapt to that or can't change with them, can't accept it at all. So how did
right.
your family deal with your evolution?
Well, and that's another great question. I quote in the book, what, 85% of marriages end after a near-death experience. And a great majority of near-death experiences are positive ones. People go straight to heaven. And so how much harder for a pastor's wife to say, I didn't go to heaven, you know?
Yeah.
And for me to finally confront him with that, it took 2 years for me to finally tell him, look, this is what happened.
Yeah.
And I've got to be upfront with you. And I was scared to tell him. But I know what a wonderful man I'm married to. That's why I married him. And he said, we'll figure this out together. And he did. I mean, he held my hand through the whole thing. He found IONS, which is the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and he signed us up for our first meeting. And we read together, we grew together, and we walked through this whole thing together. He never left my side and let me just, wallow in my sadness or fear alone. He sat by me night after night, and we made it through together. And I wish that everybody had that experience, to have a spouse that completely believed them. But my husband knew me. He knows I'm not a liar. He knows
Yeah.
I'm not one to tell tall tales. And for me to say something like this, he knew that it was based in truth, and that there was something more for us to learn out of this together.
Do you still feel like you're learning?
Absolutely.
Where
I hope
where
I never stop.
yeah, where are you in that process? Like, if you just look at yourself right now spiritually, where are you?
I just think that I've grown to a more open acceptance. And I know that that might be hard for like a Christian to hear, if I heard myself today, you know, if I heard myself back then, what I'm saying today, I'd be like, oh, she's going down the wrong road, but I know what I've experienced now. I just think that I've learned more acceptance and openness and appreciation for everything that God has created and everyone that God has created.
So
I see the purpose in everybody.
right, and like gratitude for the things that aren't messed up, right? Like,
Right.
because there's plenty
Well, and
that you
even
still
for
have
that
you
is
still have to
messed
deal with.
up.
Right. Well, that's
Yeah.
true, because dark night of the soul and all that. But it's I do come often from an atheistic point of view, which isn't to say that I don't believe that there's a super consciousness. I do believe that. I don't know for a fact, but that's what I believe. Um, but I do wonder if there is a singular consciousness in the way that we think as like an individual human. That's where I have a problem with trying to understand like all the pain that's caused. Like, I can accept that pain and suffering is a part of life, and it can
Right.
make you a better person. It can help you grow. It can make you stronger. I accept those truths, but I don't know if I can accept that someone designed it so that I have to suffer, that children have to suffer, that there's cancers and diseases. That's where I get a little hung up. Where are you with that?
Well, I still absolutely believe in free will. And I think that that's integral in what we are doing here. We have choices to make, and sometimes people's choices affect us negatively, and sometimes our choices affect others negatively. Is it fair? Absolutely not. But I think that that's part of our learning process. And I think
Hmm.
that it serves purpose in helping us grow. And I speak that from, literally dying and going through that pain. I see purpose in it.
I can't imagine what you went through. That's that it's difficult to conceive, but in some of your descriptions of what you were talking about during the book reminded me of some of my own psychedelic experiences as well. This is a comment from Ufi. Some perceive the quote creator God as a consciousness that is present at all points in time, space, dimension, etc.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
that how
and
you is that how you perceived it?
I do, to some degree. And in chapter 9, I talk about the absolute. And that comes from the gateway process that the government was doing back in the 1980s. And whenever I read about that, I said, oh my gosh, this is exactly, this is describing exactly where I was and what I went through. That's what I had come back with and was trying to formulate into words, because I'm not a quantum physicist. I don't know, you know what I mean? That's way over my head. And so a lot of chapter 9 is way over my head. That was things that were impressed on my soul while I was over there, that was operating in the absolute, outside of time and space, where it was just the beginning, basically.
Speaking of gateway, all these programs in the past that the government experimented with, not just our government, other governments as well, with psychic abilities and such. If they were so effective, why don't they continue those programs now?
Who's to say they're not? I mean,
it's like the UFO program, right? Yeah.
Right. I think they were highly successful, especially with training psychic spies and everything. And with the gateway process, what they were doing, they were using the hemisync process from the Monroe Institute, and they were utilizing different frequencies, which they would aim on each side of your brain, and it would synchronize into put you into delta waves or theta waves or something like that. And they were training the soldiers how to then utilize that and to enter into other dimensions, to contact entities there and get information from them and bring it back here. And so that's exactly a good description of what I experienced over there. If I wanted to go back psychically and visit the void, I could contact that male entity that was there with me and get information from him and bring it back. It's exactly what our government was doing, but way back in the 1980s.
That would be, have you tried that? Have you actually tried maybe contacting the entity?
I started going through, you can find the gateway process online. And so I went through about half of it, and then the pandemic happened and we sold our house and moved and everything. So I never picked it back up, but I kind of started thinking on that track. What if I did, I know that with meditation, I'm very easily able to send my consciousness back over there. I think that it's still entangled with the void to some degree.
Right. And speaking to Ufi's comment earlier and what you just said, this, when you were in the void and you were seeing this kind of like nexus point, it seems like, or origin point, or whatever it is, if time truly, according to physics, or theoretical physics, I should say, if time really isn't linear, right? It's all existing simultaneously, but just kind of hard for our human brains to wrap around. But if that's true, then is it possible when you were in the void that you were actually in the beginning?
Absolutely.
Of creation itself.
Absolutely. And that's what I was getting at. It what encompassed that spirit there, the source, was everything throughout all time. I believe I was at the beginning and the end. I was in the presence of it all. And that's what I was saying. I was laid bare in front of the Alpha and Omega. I was there in front of all of it. And while you're over there, time, I mean, there's a progression of events in a linear fashion, but you're operating outside of that as well. It's almost like you can see everything around you. You can feel everything around you all at once. Everything is in that moment, and it's everything. It's hard to put into human words, really.
So let's talk about UFOs, right? Because that's something we definitely can say we have in common, because I haven't had a near-death experience, knock on wood. How did this lead to your, I mean, you went all in on UFOs, right? Like, it wasn't just little by little, gradual, like it's amazing what you've accomplished. So tell us that part of your journey. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, after a couple of years, I had told my husband about the near-death experience and everything. After we'd moved back here to Oklahoma City, I ended up having another tear in my artery, and I ended up back in the hospital. I was in the neuro step down for a few days, and my blood pressure was hovering 40/20. I mean, I was not doing well. And so we started making my funeral arrangements. I was telling him, Mom has a burial plot over here, and I want this person to step in and be a female presence in our children's lives. And just making all of the terrible arrangements you never want to do when you're in your 30s. And out of that, he said, well, let's plan something fun. What's on the bucket list? What do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to Roswell. So he said, okay. So he planned it out. And that summer we went to the Roswell Festival. It was in 2019. And we took the kids and we had a great time. And out of that, I met Kathleen Martin, and she had started the Experiencer Resource Team for MUFON. And just driving home, I was like, wouldn't it be so cool to like sit in on MUFON meetings and hear what they talk about? And so I called headquarters, and they put me in touch with Doug Wilson, who was the director of investigations at the time. And I talked to Doug. He was so patient with me. He talked to me for over 2 hours. And I said, Doug, I really, really want to investigate. And he said, we need people in Oklahoma. And I was like, well, I'm not in the best health. I'm still passing out, and I'm in and out of the hospital. And he was like, well, if you really want to, we'll give you what you can handle. You get most of it's online when you first start. And I said, okay, this is a dream come true. I've always wanted to do this. So I did. I jumped in both feet and became an investigator. And within a year, I was state director. And then within another couple of years here, I'm working on MUFON University and heading up training worldwide. So, I mean, I really jumped in, and it really kind of served as a catalyst to my healing. I mean, I needed something to grab onto, and I was so excited to be a part of MUFON and to have that opportunity. It really drove me. Each morning I woke up excited, ready to see what new cases came in. And,
why do you think there's such a crossover between your more mystical experience, right? And a subject like ufology? We see a lot of people who have a dual or, multidisciplined interest in paranormal, UFO, metaphysics.
Well, we even see that with Bigelow now. Bigelow went from being out at Skinwalker Ranch, and now he's throwing all of his money behind near-death research. So, obviously he's found some kind of connection there as well.
Right. It makes you wonder, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But that came along as I started working cases, and the more I got in, the higher level cases I was doing, when I got to category 3 and was talking with abductees, I started going, holy cow, these people sound like me. These people have had a spiritually transformative event out of their contact encounter. And so I started taking note of it, and I thought, okay, am I just making a connection where there is none? But I just wanted to keep an eye. And I decided to read Communion by Whitley Strieber. And that's what sealed the deal for me. He had talked about a night when he came back from walking around town, and he was really wrestling with what had been going on. And he talked about this force that kind of consumed him, and it circled him, and it knew him throughout all of his time. And he ends it with saying, are we just on a stage? And I thought, oh my God, this is exactly what I got out of my near-death experience. And how can he sound so much like me, being an abductee? And so I started looking. I said, okay, if I'm noticing this, someone else that's smarter than me has noticed this before. And that's when I found Dr. Kenneth Ring and the Omega Project, where he had carried out this battery of questions back in the early 90s through the University of Connecticut. And he was comparing near-death experiencers to UFO experiencers. And he ended up identifying what he called the encounter-prone personality, and then also a set of after effects, which he saw in both types of experiencers. And
Yeah.
so it really kind of solidified that there is something running alongside both of these types of experiencers.
I wanted to ask you about that because you talk about that in the book. How do the experiencer prone personality, if no one knew anything else, it just sounds like a psychological descriptive, like like an experience that someone has psychologically. So how do we know that it's not a psychological, purely a psychological occurrence within one's own mind versus something else other and outside?
Yeah, that's one of the things that Dr. Ring really wanted to rule out was, is this someone that is fantasy prone? And some of the questions he asked served to rule that out. So these people weren't people that were outside battling dragons or,
Hmm.
you know, imagining things and, you know, I'm not an imaginative person. I I can't come up with a story, to save my life.
But you can
But
write though. You can definitely write.
well,
That's for
thank you.
sure.
I
Yeah.
can write about what I've experienced, but
Mhm.
and I even talk about that in the book where, my husband would have to tell my kids bedtime stories because I literally just I'd be like, Mindy and Juan went to the grocery store.
Like, come
Like,
on, mom, a little color in the voice.
I know. So,
I mean, but as a natural person speaking and
uh-huh,
talking, you've got, great energy and cadence and all that. So I think that maybe, yeah, you're not going to write the next trilogy of Lord of the Rings,
right.
but you are a good messenger, I think,
Well,
for
thank
these
you. I
subjects.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm so excited about Dr. Ring allowing me to share some of his research in the book because he was a trailblazer back then. I mean, he laid a foundation that I think people are just starting to catch on to with all of these similarities. And you were asking about the encounter prone personality. One of the things that he identified was that these people as children learn how to dissociate. And it wasn't that they just dissociated, but they dissociated to the exclusion of everything in their environment. So they
Mhm.
were fully immersed within their mind, almost in a meditative state where they were contacting entities in other realms. It displayed very differently from people that are extremely imaginative.
Mhm.
So he was able to rule out that this was an imaginative thing and that this was more something to do with how our brains operate, to be able to put over there, just like someone that's naturally inclined to be psychic.
I see.
They have
Okay.
something, different. They're not imagining things. They're actually contacting some kind of information out there.
Mhm.
And it's much the same thing with the encounter prone personality. So that leads into why some people die and they don't have near death experiences.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have that encounter prone personality to be able to bring that back.
Have you ever investigated on your own a UFO report that reminded you of, some kind of consciousness altering experience that would be a parallel, like a near-death experience or a um, psychedelic experience or a mystical dream, spontaneous dream state?
Well, there was one MUFON case that I investigated, and it was an ERT case. And I can't reveal everything about it since it is,
Sure. Sure.
very secretive. But this woman
Wait,
went
I just want
through,
to I just want to reframe that. Not secretive, but people ask to get their
yes,
information anonymous. Yeah.
yes.
I just don't
Thank
want to
you.
give it a
Yes,
bad rap. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes. But yes, I'm not going to reveal anything about her.
Right, right.
But she, she became one of my favorite people to talk to after investigating her case because
Mhm,
she was transformed every bit as much as I was, from an encounter that she had with
mhm.
a craft and the things that she went through. She was a completely different person coming out of that. And I just saw the transformation that she encountered. She told me about how she was before, and who I was talking to today was not the same person. And so again, that was one of the cases that really solidified to me that there is something here underlying that is changing people. And Dr. Ring actually came to the conclusion that he believed it was a new Omega prototype, where it was almost like a shamanistic journey. And it's being used, whether through ET contact or through near-death experiences, that this is being used to almost evolve the human race, to make us more open and more loving and more accepting of each other. We've got to quit fighting each other. We've got to quit. We don't have any hope.
So I guess the idea here is that if they just come down, let's say they're extraterrestrials or interdimensionals, whatever, if they just kind of impose themselves obviously and directly into our affairs, the thinking here is that wouldn't actually help us evolve. Because if that were the case, they would just do it, right?
Right. Well, I mean, maybe they don't want to come visit us, but I mean, whenever we're talking of these entities from other places, there are so many outlets where we could be seeing them coming from. I believe a lot of them are interdimensional. I think there's a good basis for maybe thinking that some of them are coming from inner Earth. And then there is good evidence for them coming from off planet. So we may be seeing a mixture of some of these things, and not everybody's friendly. So there's a lot to wade through. It's not just one thing that's coming here.
Yeah.
There's a lot to uncover with it.
Right. And researchers have their own perspectives. Like David Jacobs has a much more, dire perspective. And then you have other researchers who are like, it's generally pretty benign. In your investigations, what is your best guess as to what these UFO UAP encounters are, or maybe their origin? Best guess.
Best guess. Well, that's the $1 million question here. Like I said, I think that it's
no money on the table. No money on the table. Look, but if you just had to throw one idea out there.
Yeah. Well, and I'm very big on the interdimensional hypothesis.
Okay. Gotcha.
I mean, because I encountered an interdimensional being, and I was able to come back. I see very good evidence for why they would be able to come over here and pop into our existence. I think that that's some of the advanced technology that we're seeing. It's almost like being in a video game. Code something in, and there it's popped into that reality. And again, that's what I get into in chapter 9, where I literally came back feeling like I had entered the Matrix. And so I think that a lot of this is simulation. We can pop things in and out. And I believe that they're utilizing some of that, but that's not to say that's the only thing that we're seeing.
Did you get to see Avi Loeb speak at the symposium?
I didn't get to see anybody speak at the symposium.
Because you're so busy. Yeah.
I plan on going back and watching all of them this next week. Okay. Yeah.
Where are we with the training program in MUFON? Because I know that you are making some updates, some upgrades.
Yes. Yeah. This last year we've been plugging away. MUFON University was the brainchild of Ken St. John about 15 years ago, and it was built and it was left stagnant basically. And that's what all of our field investigators have been going through, the training on there. Well, about a year ago, I got with one of our board of directors, Terry Lynn Kill, who's one of my very, very best friends within MUFON. And I said, why can't we film something and stick it up there, that's kind of more updated? And that turned into a year-long process where we've now completely revamped it. We've gone over to a whole new platform, and we have built, there are videos for every aspect of the investigation. So we're showing people how to investigate the astronomical objects. We're showing people how to investigate flight radar and how to look at the meteor reports and, just every aspect of what we do to be able to rule out the false positives and misidentifications. And so there's hours and hours of instruction on there. And here within the next 2-3 weeks, it'll be launched in tandem with our new investigation form. So normally 4:30 is what we work our investigations on. That's been completely revamped and updated to reflect our newest capabilities. And so it'll go hand in hand with the new training. And the training will be only for field investigators. So if someone's interested in ufology and they're wanting to get involved, they can always go join MUFON and talk to the state director and become a field investigator, go through the exam. And once they pass that exam, then they'll be able to go on to MUFON University and get all of that wonderful training that we've been working on so hard for the last year. So I was able to give a little preview of it there at the state director meeting at the symposium.
Mhm.
And it was overwhelming. The state directors received it just with open arms. They're
Yeah.
so excited about it. And so that got me really excited to see them so happy about what we've done, because we've worked our tails off. And I'm really hoping it'll set a new standard within MUFON and just within ufology as a whole.
That's awesome, because it really is needed. Needless to say, it was dated, to a
Yeah.
degree, we'll say.
It was.
It was. And now I get to go through it again, which is kind of cool.
Hey.
And so brush up on some information, and I'm sure there'll be some new information. But yeah, I mean, having more up to date and video technology for training, I think is fantastic. So I encourage anyone who's just interested to go check out MUFON for sure. Mindy,
Absolutely.
your website is mindytautfest.com. You can get her book there. If you could leave us with any thought,
Any thought?
what would it be?
Oh my goodness. That's a wide open question there, Alan.
Totally wide
you put me
open.
on the spot.
Yep. Just not
Any
sports.
thought?
Yeah.
I want to say, the Miss America answer, and let's have peace and love each other. And,
Right.
that's really what it boils down to. Let's just learn to get along and love each other. And then maybe one day we'll, actually get some kind of visit from the others, and they won't be so scared to show up on the scene.
I really, truly hope that we can achieve that. And I hope that that is the case, that we'll be invited to the cosmic table when we do that.
Absolutely.
Right. Mindy, thank you so much for joining tonight. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Alan. I appreciate you having me.
All right. Awesome. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you for everyone in chat. Great questions, great comments. This podcast is rebroadcast tonight on the UNX network at 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 11 p.m. Pacific Time. And I want to send a special thanks to Race Hobbs and Margie K, because those two are doing a phenomenal job with building the UNX network, KUNX DB. It's growing so fast. It's going to be 2 years this October 31st. So if any of y'all want to join that 2-year celebration, they're doing it on Halloween night. So just jump over to that YouTube channel and join in the chat, because I'll definitely be popping in that night for sure. So thanks again, everyone. Peace and love to you all. And until next time, live in the mystery.